This chapter addresses the role of fluids and electrolytes. A fluid is characterized by its ability to move freely and adapt to the shape of the container that holds it. That might seem obvious and not very important, but the fluid composition of cells and tissues is actually critical to the body's ability to function. Between 50 and 70% of a healthy adult's body weight is fluid, and about 2/3 of the body's fluid is held within the walls of cells. It's known as the intracellular fluid. Every cell in the body contains fluids. When cells lose their fluid, they quickly shrink and die. On the other hand, when cells take in too much fluid, they can swell and actually burst. That's why appropriate fluid balance is so critical to life. The remaining of the body's fluid is referred to as extracellular fluid because it flows outside of the cell, and that can be separated into two different types. You can have interstitial fluid, which is the fluid that flows in between the cell, and intravascular fluid, which is the fluid that flows within the bloodstream. Not every tissue in the body contains the same amount of fluid. Lean tissue or muscle mass contain roughly 70% of water, whereas fatty tissue or adipose tissue is only between 10 and 20% fluid, which makes sense because we've talked about fats being hydrophobic, not liking being in a watery environment. Here, surprisingly, the brain is 75% water. The functions of water is this. Water is a solvent, which means it can dissolve and transport substances. It accounts for blood volume. If you have too much water in the bloodstream, you'll get an increase in blood pressure, which, as you know, increases the risk of heart disease. If you don't have enough fluid in the bloodstream, then you'll have low blood pressure, which can cause people to feel tired, confused, or dizzy. A good example of that is if you get up from your chair too fast, sometimes you'll get a bit of a dizzy spell. It's because your blood pressure is too low and it's not pushing the blood back to the brain on time. Fluids can help maintain body temperature, so it can help prevent overheating, and it can also act as a primary coolant for the body, and can help protect and lubricate tissues. There are mineral salts called electrolytes that can dissolve in water. The 5 major minerals that act as electrolytes in the body is sodium, the Na if you don't know your science, calcium, just down here, potassium, chloride, and phosphorus. These hold a charge, so they can either be positive or negative. Electrolytes also have several functions, one of which is that it can help regulate fluid balance. Remember that cell membranes are permeable to water. That means that the water can flow easily through them, in and out. Cells can't voluntarily regulate this flow of water and have no active control over the balance of fluids between the intracellular and extracellular compartments. That's the role of the electrolytes. If the concentration of electrolytes is the same inside the cell as it is outside the cell, you won't get much flow of fluid between the two. But if you have a higher concentration of electrolytes inside the cell than you do outside the cell, water is going to move towards the inside in order to make the concentration equal inside the cell and outside the cell. Well, that can be quite dangerous because the cell can actually get too much water and burst. If a cell is put in a very concentrated solution, meaning the concentration is greater on the outside of the cell than is on the inside of the cell, water is going to come out of the cell in order to try and equalize the concentration between the inside and the outside environment, causing the cell to shrink and can eventually die. So the electrolyte drag in the water or push out the water because the water is trying to equalize the concentration between the two environments. That's called osmosis if you've taken biology. Electrolytes also enable nerves to respond to stimuli. So when a nerve fires, it fires with the help of sodium and potassium, which are 2 electrolytes. It can also cause muscle contractions. Muscle contractions, again, work with potassium, sodium, and calcium. All right, so once again, there's no sense in me going through each of these one at a time or else you won't retain any of the information. So I've made up some questions where you can start at page 341 in your book, talking about water, and answer some of these questions. The importance of water is going to come up again during the talk on sports nutrition. I invite you to please press pause because I'm going to move through these slides in about 2 seconds. Sodium is quite important. Virtually all of the dietary sodium consumed is absorbed by the body, mostly through the small intestine, but some also in the large intestine. Potassium, the major positively charged electrolyte in the intracellular fluid. Only about 85% though the dietary potassium is absorbed. We have chloride, a negatively charged ion. We can obtain this through salt, so there's very little cause for worry about deficiency. Phosphorus, most commonly found combined with oxygen in the form of phosphate. And this one last question. What is the role of water and electrolytes in muscle cramping during endurance sports? If you need a bit of a hint, you can go to the back of the chapter on pages 356 and 357 of your textbook.